Good morning. Let's welcome you to Phase 4 of Illinois. Whatever that means. But we do, at some point, we need to have some sort of parameters of when we're going to move to our next phase, we'll say it that way. As a church, I know today the two Baptist churches have been having services for a number of weeks now. Obviously we have. And today the other two churches here in Toulon have their service for the first time today. And there's other churches in Stark County that are yet to open. It looks like they're pushing for August before they even start having services again. And I suspect, as many of the southern states that opened up right away are proving that there's going to be some sort of, I don't know if I'm going to call it a phase 2, but there's going to be, as we get more places open, bowling alleys and all restaurants and all that, the numbers have got to start going up at some point. And so we're just going to keep an eye on all of that and work our way through this. But at this point, I'm glad for one service a week. And as long as we stay healthy, we can continue with one service a week. And we'll see how that goes. For those watching online, if there is anybody, if you have any prayer requests, send them in. For those of us here, we will take prayer requests in a moment. I don't know that we have any other announcements. Seems all is well. Everybody go out to eat at a restaurant on Friday night, the first time. Let me tell you how our adventure went. Well, we had to run into Peoria to get some things, and so my favorite restaurant in Peoria is McAllister's Deli. I love their French dip. French dip with extra meat, extra beef. And we said, we're not going to. In fact, it didn't even look like they were doing dining in. They weren't doing dining anyway. But when we left, we said, if we stop for dinner, I'm all right with just eating in the van. And we've accomplished since March. We've accomplished McAllister's in the van a few times, which is a little challenging with the beef. You got the au jus, and so when you sit with the steering wheel right here, and so but it's worked. So far, it has worked. Well, Friday,
so far.
it didn't work. Keep in mind, when we do go, and if we do eat in Peoria, especially during this time frame, we usually will go eat first, even if it's early, just because obviously we have hand sanitizer in the van, but I just feel better being able to wash your hands with running water here at the house. We go right to a restaurant, we get food, we eat, and then we do our shopping. So that's important for this scenario here. We eat first, then we shop. Because obviously as you're touching things and in places and opening doors and all of that, it just seems safer for us, so that's what we do. So, as we have done in the past, McAllister's Deli, pull up to the, what do you call it, curbside pickup. They bring it out to you. We back up to the middle of the parking lot and sit there in the parking lot and eat our dinner. And I've done it flawlessly to this point. Friday night, I was on one of my last bites, and this big chunk of beef started, and you can't sacrifice beef. It falls on the floor, I'm not eating it. So you can't sacrifice beef. So here I've got this little tray. It's like a hot dog tray almost. And it's got my container of au jus in it, just an open cup of au jus. And I'm holding that like right here as I'm eating. So I dip, and I'm about like this, and the big chunk of beef falls out the bottom. So I go to move my little hot dog tray to catch I'm not sacrificing the beef. So I move it, and in so doing it, boom, and the whole cup of au jus went whoosh, right down my front. It was an instantaneous feeling of, this is very hot, which moved to the instantaneous feeling of, this is very wet. And there's nothing like then going to Lowe's and Kohl's with this big pretty much from here to my knee.
People passing us were so hungry.
Yeah, suddenly, it's McAllister's Deli, just wanted right down the road. That smell of beef you get? Me. Should have just started wearing their hat or something.
Yeah.
Just a,
Yeah.
au jus.
You said it wouldn't make a good cologne.
By the, I kid you not, we pulled into the parking lot and we had or in our driveway, we had stuff in the back to get out. And I said, you know what, I've got to take a shower. I've worn grease long enough. I am done. So our first Although we did not go into a restaurant our first adventure out on Friday night. It did not fare well. And I'm hoping
This is
this is what phase 4 looks like for me.
yeah,
Exactly. Yes, exactly. But we hope that the others have had better fortune here in phase 4 of Illinois. But do we have any prayer requests? Besides my eating lack of ability here, I don't know if we had any updates from this week.
she can go first.
I have 2 classic cases, and right now a lot of things are bubbling to the surface. It's just thinking about it.
Yes. Very good.
We should keep praying for John Miller, just health and strength, and then for Sharon Miller as she takes care of him. So they just had a long weekend. There'll be some appointments this week, so keep them in prayer. And I do have 2 missionary letters. I meant to print them. I will print them. One is from the Burbs. They're doing well, but they're definitely still under some restrictions. Like they don't have all their families back in church yet, but their school's open. So now they're able to do their Bible class. So they're glad for
Yes.
that. And he's still, I think I know she shared with me that he had some vertigo. I'm pretty sure I shared that as a prayer request. And that's passed, but he just asked prayer. He basically said, as we're getting older, our bodies are letting us know it's not as easy as it used to be, or something
Yeah.
like that. So, just for their health and strength in ministry. And they did lose some support, but the Lord has provided some part-time work there in Australia, so they're thankful for it, but kind of letting people know that it's with all the churches closing down and things, some couldn't continue as they
Yes.
were before. So that was them. And for a while, we had Josh Siechlug, it's a pastor family in Wisconsin, and Josh was in the Army. He'd been on the list well. Everything they've been praying for is coming. He's now been considered retired from the Army, which is a good status for what he was going for. And so he has a lot of closing out things that'll go till August 1st. But they're just very thankful that this has happened, and they're expecting a baby any day now, so there's a lot of still transition going on. But there was just a lot of prayer, because with his injuries, he just didn't think he could keep doing it, and so thankfully for them, things came the way they were really hoping they would.
Yes.
So that's a blessing.
Yes.
But prayer for this baby that's coming. That's it.
AJ has been on a roller coaster of sorts. Not really, but of sorts. Maybe it's more, we have been on a roller
Yeah.
coaster.
He's content.
Yeah, he's, wherever he's sent, he's good to go. But because of Corona, he's, in the last several weeks, he's had pretty much, I think, 3 options. One, they were just going to keep him for another year in Turkey and not do the normal annual transitions elsewhere, just because of the lining up of what countries people are coming from and where they're going and the requirements of Corona. I just can't imagine what that's like for the State Department, trying to figure all that out. How do you move Marines from this place to this place and meet this country's needs, our country's needs, and theirs all? How do you do that? So that was one scenario where he just stay where he is there in Turkey. The other one was that he will get moved, but it'll be later as opposed to the 1 year anniversary. And now most recently he's hearing that he may be getting moved the end of this month or beginning of August, which could mean then he could be home. I'm not sure if that's still a possibility, but we'll see. So certainly a lot up in the air, and I imagine, as all of our lives are, just much in the air. It's a little different when you're thousands of miles away from even our continent. But so continue to pray for all of them involved. And obviously, kind of like, I can't think of what that, not necessarily chess, but one person gets moved, another person has to get moved, and this person has to get moved, and so it's, you just can't move somebody without it affecting a gazillion other nations involved, and so it's a challenge there as well. my sister-in-law with the allergies, so I'm gonna have to preach extra loud for her because she likes that, number one, and to keep her awake because she's probably already had allergy medicine, so she's druggy. So this is for you, Christy. Yeah. What was the word that I kept using the other day? I forget. Several weeks ago. But anyway, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Dear Lord, we thank you again for all that you've done for us. We thank you for your goodness. We thank you for your mercy. Thank you that you're always there. And certainly as these on our screen, those that are on our hearts are going through different needs, even perhaps ourselves, I just pray that we be able to sense your very presence, that through the trial, that our desire would not be just the removal of the trial, but the very reminder of you in that trial. So you pray for the couple of CASA cases right now. I just pray that you be with Michelle, and certainly the road that is ahead and all the things that are bubbling to the surface, all the conversations. I pray that you just guide and even bless in those scenarios. And I just pray that you would put a hedge of protection around these kids, and just that those adults that are making decisions, both their parents and perhaps step-parents and the court system and lawyers, attorneys, and even Michelle and those that she's working with, as all these adults are making decisions, I just pray that you would lead them to what is best, to what is honoring to you and what is best for the child. And I just pray that you would certainly go before them. I just pray that you be with John Miller as well. Certainly some health needs in these last couple of weeks and don't seem to be resolving themselves. I just pray that you would give them grace, to give patience, certainly give Sharon the rest that she needs, that she'd be able to continue moving forward and in the care and the appointments and all that's going on. But I just pray that you would give relief and that you would bring healing. And I just pray that even in the appointments, the events of this week, that they'd be able to find a remedy, be able to find a course of action, and that you be glorified in this. We certainly do pray for the Bergs there in Australia, and certainly as they're going through this COVID just like we are. And I certainly do pray that you would be with them as even having lost some support and obviously unable to come home to raise support. I just pray that you continue to meet their needs, that you continue to provide in ways beyond their imagination. And I just pray that you, again, would be honored through this, that church there and that Don and Angie as well, that they'd be able to sense your very leading and your provision in their hearts and lives. Certainly do pray for Josh Sheedlog and his wife, and certainly this baby here coming very soon. I just pray that in this last month here in the military, that you would certainly iron out all the speed bumps, that all that has to get done here in these, and certainly a lot of paperwork. I just pray that all of it would be accomplished, and just that you would certainly bless this young couple as they're starting out life now out of the military, and as well with a child, a family. And I just pray that you would guide them and protect them as well. Certainly do pray for Christy as well with these allergies, and it is a little under the weather today. I just pray that you would give her the strength and healing as well. And I just pray that you be with each one of us with different needs, with different requests, different circumstances right now. I pray that we'd see you, that we'd rejoice in you, and we thank you for what you will do. In Jesus' name, amen. This morning, I believe we have two specials, both from my wife. Very good. Thank you. We want to look at Exodus chapter 17 here this morning. As we look at the continued living Christianity in quarantine, and then I renamed it to, what do I have? Responding to our chaos. And we've had a number of, actually 8 so far. In responding to our chaos and living Christianity in our quarantine, we need to know remedy, we need to know the peace, longevity, God's presence. We need to know what praise is. We need to know what trust is. We need to know the test, that there's a test often involved. We need to know last week what contentment is. And here this morning we want to look at, we need to know obedience. Do we know what obedience truly is? Do we know what stops us from obedience? This next chapter has plenty of opportunities for the nation of Israel to have stopped in their obedience, for Moses to have stopped in his obedience. And frankly, probably chapter 17 is a good reminder for us, because I don't know if we would have passed the test as well as they did. They certainly didn't get an A plus on this test of chapter 17. But honestly, as you look at what they went through and how they did it, how they responded, I sometimes wonder if Christianity today would score just a little lower than what they did. What is obedience? Before we begin the challenge, the chapter, let's begin with a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you again for all that you've done for us. We thank you for your word. I pray that as we dive into it here this morning, you allow me to decrease, you alone would increase here this morning. I pray that you be honored. I pray that you would be reflected in our hearts as we look to your word, and I pray that you'd work in our hearts. And I pray that you change our steps, change our thinking. And we thank you for this opportunity. In Jesus' name, amen. I was reading this week a little in regards to the training process of Arabian horses from the Arabian Peninsula. And it takes a special kind of person to train these horses, especially back even in Old Testament time frames. I don't know if my daughter Rebecca, with her love of animals, could train the way that they train these horses. Just the I'll say it this way, near abuse that they went through to train these horses to ultimately to bring them through the deserts to battle in most cases. Well, part of the training, from what I am understanding back in this day, and even continued on many centuries later, would be that they, towards the end of this training process, they would withhold water from these horses for a number of days. Now, obviously, a horse drinks a lot of water, especially when you're out in the Arabian area. And so they withhold water from these horses for a number of days. And then on a specified day, kind of their final exam, they'd allow the horses to be free for the first time in kind of like AJ after boot camp. For the first time after however long, you have, Chipotle. Yeah, exactly. Just like AJ at boot camp, the first place we go is got to be Chipotle. We got to have a burrito. Well, obviously, if you withheld water from horses for a number of days, where do you think they're going to go? To that watering hole that they're very familiar with. They just haven't been allowed to go there for days. And so what I am reading is that the trainers would set the horses free, knowing that they're going to go right for the water. And right as they get to the water, as they are dipping their head, their noses towards the water, they make the command to have them return to them. The horses that take a sip first failed. The horses that immediately stood back up, turned around, and went right back to their trainer passed the test. And then obviously then their trainer would then lead them back to the water and allow them to finally drink. But that immediate test of you are thirsty, you haven't had this in a number of days, it's a hot, arid area, you need water, but are you going to be obedient enough that even when the water is right there and literally inches from your nose, will you turn around and go back, leaving the water that you haven't tasted in days? That's obedience. That's a well-trained horse. Our little dog would just put his little backside down and say, as we've often said in our house, nope, not today. He sports an attitude frequently with us. This is what I'm going to do, and this is only what I'm going to do, and nothing else is what I'm going to do. Well, when we consider the obedience of our God, how often are we that obedient? That what we see, what we want, what we've longed for, what we think we have to have is right there within our grasp, but we are willing to stop and turn around and follow our God even away from it, if that's what he's called us to do. That's phenomenal obedience. I think a lot of times and I know I've mentioned this before, I think a lot of times in our obedience to our God, we have this thinking that if I'm obeying God, there's going to be blessings, right? And if things are falling apart, it's because I must not be following God's will. And it's a whole host of realms of how this works, but if things fall into place, what do we often say? Oh, it was God's will. Everything fell into place. If things are a little bumpy, if they're a little scattered, if they at times seem to be, in our vantage points anyway, a little chaotic, that it's not going the way we thought it was going to go, what do we conclude? It wasn't God's will. That I don't know that there could be anything farther from the truth at times, because I think that there are times that our God brings us into times of thirst, which is literally my first point. I'm getting ahead of myself. He brings us to times of thirst so that we will be in his will. And there's a lot of times I can say, for all of us, probably myself as well, that we conclude whenever there is a trial, whenever things aren't going well, that I must not be following what God wants us to do. Things fall into place, and you know those times, but it just all happens, and boom, 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 and wow, what did we say? That was God. Things are not falling into place. That wasn't God. Well, can I say this? Exodus chapter 17, things are not falling into place at all from humanity's vantage point, but they were exactly where God wanted them to be. Do we grasp that obedience sometimes involves a trial? Do we grasp that obedience sometimes involves a testing? Look at Exodus chapter 17, verse 1. And all the congregation of the children of Israel journeyed from the wilderness of Sin. Remember last week, the wilderness, although that's an interesting name for this wilderness when you consider their wanderings, their complainings. But it seems that the Sin was a name, very fittingly so, the name of a moon god. And so this region was kind of that region that was dedicated to him. So here they are journeying through that wilderness of sin. And after their journeys, according to the commandment of the Lord, and pitched in Rephidim, and there was no water for the people to drink. Notice it says there in that first verse, sort of there in the middle, according to what? The commandment of the Lord. According to the commandment of the Lord, they are exactly where they ought to be. Now, a couple of weeks ago I gave you the I don't know how to do that backwards, so you have to look at my knuckles. But you got the Sinai Peninsula, you got Egypt over here, you got what would be Canaan up here, Mediterranean's over here. Remember Elim, the oasis, is kind of like right here with the two bodies of water here. The Red Sea. So Elim was here. Mount Sinai, they believe, is somewhere down in here. Pretty much the bottom half of this is all mountainous areas. The top part is more of a plain, of a flat area. Now, I have to hesitate to say for Illinois, when we think flat, we think Illinois. There's nothing over there that's like Illinois. There's nothing that flat over there. When I say flat, I'm meaning more perhaps like Kentucky, southern Indiana, even portions of Wisconsin kind of flat compared to what is down here where it's just very mountainous. And so as they're leaving Elim, which is more in the plains area, and there's an oasis right there in the middle of the wilderness where they stayed, and then they moved down and they had the troubles of last week that we looked at. Here they moved even farther, I guess that would be farther south, which is funny because it's all water here, but the Lord is taking them down between these two bodies of water where they have nowhere else to go. But that's about where Mount Sinai is, which is where they are to go. Here in chapter 17, verse 1, the Lord makes it very clear that where they are supposed to go right now for this day, for this week, for this part of their journey, they have to go to Rephidim. What is in Rephidim? Or I should say, what is not in that area? Water. And as we kind of look at the very reality of they're moving from the plains, the wilderness, the plains of the wilderness, now they're getting into the desert, the arid type of mountains. There's even less water now than there was before where they were. I want to remind us here in these next couple of verses that at times our obedience may leave us thirsty. Again, by the commandments of the Lord, they pitched in Rephidim, and there was no water for the people to drink. This isn't just like us. This is a small group of people gathering. This isn't even the entirety of the city of Toulon traveling. This is a good 1 million people that are traveling. And what does the Bible say? No water. 1 million people, no water. But again, the middle of verse 1 says, per the commandment of the Lord, they are now here. And to be reminded, and I'm not saying this in a dismal way, this is not the Eeyore syndrome. Oh, bother, serving the Lord means I gotta be thirsty. This is not what this is all about. At times, though, our Lord does allow us to be, quote unquote, thirsty, so that we be able to understand who He is, so that we be able to understand He is there. And again, from our estimation of what is God's will and what is not God's will, the moment that we begin to get thirsty, we immediately begin to think, this must not be God's will. I'm suffering, it must not be Him. I'm having to sacrifice, it must not be God's will. God's will, everything falls into place and everything is great. The birds chirp and the rainbows are bright and there's the sweet smell of spring always outside, whatever it might be. But there are times, and we see it right here, by the commandment of the Lord, they are brought directly, by God's command, you camp here. Oh, and by the way, there's no water. How often do we come to the Rephidims of our life and say, I'm just moving on. This can't be God. This can't be what God has for me. This can't be what He thinks is right for me. I have to have water. This is not going to work. Do you think that God didn't know that there was no water there? You think that took God by surprise? All right, guys, here we're going to go. We're going to go to this place called Rephidim, a place, undoubtedly a place that they named, because there really wasn't a place already there called Rephidim. It wasn't like going to Wyoming, Illinois. There's no town here. It was just, they named the place. And so they're here in this place. God says, camp here. And they look around and they say, but there's no water. God says, camp here anyway. Camp here. God knew that there was no water. Do you think that God had a purpose for them being there in a place of no water? Absolutely. Just like He has a purpose and a place in our hearts, in our lives, in places of no water. In Numbers chapter 33, in like a parallel account, you don't need to turn there. I'll point this out, that it says that after they left the wilderness of Sin, they first encamped at Dafka and then they encamped at Alush. Both of them are not made any mention of a lack of water. So they've gone from one place and they undoubtedly had water. They went to the next place, they had water. Now God brings them to a third place, and no water. Lord, what are you doing? Lord, this can't work. This is not what you must have intended. We have to turn back. We have to go back to where we ought to be, where we should be, where there's water. Now, here's what I'm getting at. Why is it in our obedience, when it leaves us thirsty, that we view it as a negative thing, where other things that leave us thirsty we don't view as so negative? Let me take you down. I already spoke about beef this morning. Let me take you down another trail of beef. Imagine going home this afternoon, and if this is your case, feel free to invite us over because this sounds really good to me. Imagine you go home this afternoon, you're going to throw a nice big juicy steak on the grill. And my vantage point of a nice great juicy steak is, 145 degrees is the minimum temperature for steak being in the safe zone. So 147 degrees is about it's stopped moving, and just a few more minutes, now it's good. It's perfect. It's good. So you throw this slab of beef on a plate, and one of the things that I love right next to it is I know this is going to sound strange, and this is what I asked my wife to do because I know she'd do something differently if I didn't ask her. But I love stovetop stuffing, and I know it's not Thanksgiving. But stuffing just seems to work really well, in my opinion, with steak. So you get a good chunk of beef right here that's still very pink in the middle, and a pile of stuffing. And I know this is going to surprise some of you, and Mary's mom needs to hear this. Right next to that, a steamed broccoli. That's all she needs to hear. Stop listening. Now, what I put on the rest of it is a lot of freshly shredded cheddar cheese right over the top of that. Amazing, especially with the steak right here. And then potatoes. My wife loves baked potatoes. I love mashed potatoes, thick mashed potatoes. And so you got a pile of those. I don't need gravy, no butter, no nothing, just mashed potatoes right there. And then the perfect completion of my plate is a pile of cold cottage cheese. And ultimately, that is like the perfect meal. And if you do your proportions right, there's no room left on the plate. So whatever needs to be had more of, you got to fill the whole plate. That is the perfect meal. Now, as my mind is going there, and my mouth is already salivating for that very thought, does that not make you thirsty? It makes me very thirsty. And in fact, I'll drink a glass of a root beer or something, or even cold milk. I don't normally have this, but cold milk is actually very good, I think, with a steak, with that menu right there. But you finish that, and I'm still thirsty. And I'm not saying, why'd you have to make me that dinner? Now I'm thirsty. And all I'm saying, oh, honey, that was an amazing meal. I need to go sit on the couch for a little bit. Can I have another root beer? Can I have a glass of water? I'm just thirsty. There are times when we look at our thirst, and we'll kind of put this in quotations, our thirst, our sacrifice, our times of need, as this is a good thing, this is a beneficial thing. But when it involves our obedience, it's almost natural in our mindset anyway to think, well, if I'm obeying God, I shouldn't ever be thirsty. And if I am thirsty, there's something wrong. That God did something wrong. He's not doing his part of the spectrum. There are times that our Lord brings us to times of thirst for our good, for our benefit. And we need to look at it just like the very same thirst that we get from eating a slab of beef and broccoli and stuffing and cottage cheese and potatoes. That there are times that you're going to be thirsty. There are times that God has led us to those very times so that we have a gain in our lives, so we have a growth in our lives, so we have a benefit in our lives. Look at continuing on. Well, let me read the rest of these verses. Verse 2. Wherefore the people did chide with Moses and said, give us water that we may drink. And Moses said unto them, why chide ye with me? Why is Moses saying that? Why are they there? Verse 1. By the commandment of the Lord. It wasn't Moses saying, hey, here's where we're going to camp. This is a great place to camp, guys. We're going to camp here for the night. Moses is saying, hey, why are you complaining to me? God told us to be here. This is God's command. This is God's leading. Moses says, why chide you with me? Wherewith do you tempt the Lord? Because it was the Lord that commanded them to be there. And The people thirsted there for water, and the people murmured against Moses, and said, Wherefore is it that thou hast brought us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our cattle with thirst? Now, I don't want us to get to the point where we keep seeing them complaining and saying, I wish I was back in Egypt. But can you imagine where they are right now? Where they have experienced for the first time in their life thirst like they've never thirsted before. Now, they had it before. 3 days after crossing the sea, 3 days after seeing the armies of Pharaoh being destroyed by the water, they go 3 days into the wilderness and they're thirsty, and God brings them to the bitter water, and then God brings them to Elim. So they've been thirsty before, and they've seen God provide. But here they are, thirsty again. And they're beginning to question again, why are we here? Back in the land of the Nile? Back in the land of denial.
Yes.
Back in the land of Nile, which now it's the land of denial, we had water. We had everything that we needed. Now we have nothing. Moses' response is correct. Why are you complaining to me? This isn't me. This is my God. It's God that brought us here. It's God that did this. And our obedience at times may lead us to times of thirst. Not necessarily where we want water, but where there's something in our life where we conclude, wait a minute, this isn't the way it's supposed to go. I obey God, He blesses me. I obey God, the birds chirp outside. It's a beautiful day. I shouldn't be obeying God right into the storm. I shouldn't be obeying God right into this disaster, which is funny that we have that thought many times. But yet we know that Daniel obeyed God right into what? The fiery furnace. We know that Daniel obeyed God right into a storm that he didn't imagine. We know that the apostles obeyed God for the most part, all of them. Obeyed him right into martyrdom. You know, Stephen, the first one, obeyed God right to becoming the first martyr. We know that Christ himself followed the will of the Father to the cross. We know that Paul followed the will of God right into prison after prison after prison after prison. But yet somehow when things aren't going the way that we want them to go, we immediately conclude that either God is not doing his end of the deal or I must not be in God's will. Well, the truth is that sometimes God's will is for us to be thirsty. Not for our punishment, not for our neglect, not because God has forgotten us, but because God has done the exact opposite. He is there with us, and we need to learn, we need to grow. Continue on, verse 5. Let me read verse 4. And Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, What shall I do unto this people? They be almost ready to stone me. Moses is beginning to fear for his life. The people are that agitated. They're going to kill me, God. What am I supposed to do with these people? Not only does our obedience lead us to thirst, but sometimes our obedience may leave us confused. Notice what God says. The Lord said unto Moses, Go on before the people, and take with thee of the elders of Israel, and thy rod, wherewith thou smotest the river, take in thine hands, and go. Behold, I will stand before thee there upon the rock in Horeb, and thou shalt smite the rock, and there shall come water out of it, that the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. And he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the children of Israel, the chiding of the children of Israel, because they tempted the Lord, saying, Is the Lord among us or not? Now, let me back up and give you a little background. Remember Moses. Where was Moses born? Moses, like all of them, was born in Egypt. And Moses was born in Egypt, raised in Egypt, spent the first 40 years in Egypt, in Pharaoh's house as the kind of adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter, so to speak. And then he sees his own people getting beaten, and what does he do? He acts out in anger, he kills the man, and obviously his own people don't care much for him, and the people that have adopted him don't care much for him, and so he runs for his life. Where does Moses go? It's Midian. He goes to a pretty much another mountainous area. In fact, I'll say it this way, a very similar mountain area. And he, for the next 40 years, finds himself a wife, finds himself, obviously then, a father-in-law. He works for his father-in-law, tending to his animals. Unlike this area, and I think right down the road here, and I know that they're getting rid of their cows down the road here, I believe, but right down the road here, just a few miles out of town, there's a large, I forget, was that 50 acres of land that is designated for cattle. And they're just out there. So here's a cattle owner who just has a lot of acreage. He bought, 100 acres, throw some beef there, walking beef, and there they go. And obviously there's a lot of responsibilities. That's a milking facility, so he's got all the routines, all the chores that are involved, and so it's a lot of work. But back in this day and age, again, reminding yourselves that we're talking about a very arid, we're talking about a very dry kind of an area. Imagine being a shepherd of sorts, maybe not of sheep, but of any kind of goats, of cattle, of whatever it is, in that era, in that area, to be the one to care for animals meant a life of travel. Because you would take them literally, they don't have the green like we do today. Here in the United States, in Illinois, in the Midwest. They would go kind of like as we drove through New Mexico. You drive down that interstate down there in New Mexico as we were heading to California last winter, I guess. You head down, it's just all brown, and every once in a while you see a clump of trees and some grass and whatnot, and then you go for miles and it's just brown. It's just like desert. And then you'll see another area, kind of a lower area, maybe even some water. And then that's how their area was. Except they also had, which I guess this has mountains as well. So if you've ever been to the New Mexico, Arizona area, that's literally kind of very similar to where Moses is. So imagine having to be the one responsible for animals. You go to this area, and how long does it take for a large amount of animals to completely wipe out the green? Not very long. So you go to the next area, and you go to the next area. Moses did that for how long? 40 years. You think Moses was pretty much an expert of all the areas that had water, that had sustenance, that had the means to keep not only himself, but herd alive as well? Do you realize that, again, here we got the Sinai Peninsula. It's kind of a mountain range that goes right through here. They are right in this area right now. You know where Moses spent 40 years? Kind of where his father-in-law lived is right here. So all of this area, Moses is, we'll call him this, Moses is the expert. I've walked these trails. And again, let me give you some more background information. In that area, when we think even in the wanderings of the nation of Israel, we sometimes just think of a group of people just wandering aimlessly through. There's roads, not like we have, not paved roads by any means, but there are paths that people with herds traveled down. There are paths that led from one watering place to another watering place to another watering place. And you didn't really necessarily dare go off of those paths because you didn't know where the watering place would go. So as the nation of Israel is, even in their wanderings, which technically they're not even to Mount Sinai yet, so they're not even to the wandering part of their stage yet. But even in their wanderings, they are following somewhat designated areas. They're kind of staying in the middle. They're not just out in the middle of a wide open desert just wandering. They're following paths around and around and around and around. Many of those paths in this region, the very same ones that Moses had himself gone down. Now that as background, we go back to verse 1 where God says, go to Rephidim. Again, that's not a town, that's not a community. There's no houses there. There's no water tower there. There's no inhabitation there. That's more likely a name that they gave that area because that's where they camped, and they named their camp. But God says, I want you to go, say 6 miles that way. Moses is the expert. We don't have this recorded for us, but here's what I'd be saying as an expert. God, I don't, with all due respect, I know that 6 miles that way, there's nothing. There's no trees, there's no water, there's nothing. There's nothing for our animals to eat. There's nothing for our children to eat. There's nothing for us to eat. with all due respect, God, I would just recommend that we stay on this trail because I know that in, say, 7 miles, there's a spot where there's an oasis that has the water and all. This is where this isn't recorded for us. Let's take it a liberty. This is if I were Moses. I am the expert. Moses was the expert. This is the area that Moses tended to the cattle, the sheep, the goats, whatever it was, of his father-in-law. This was the very roads, the very paths that Moses had already traveled on. He knew the area. He was the expert. Not a single one of the people behind him had ever been there in their life. Moses alone is able to say, wait, I've been here before. He could probably say, I've done this as we drive down the roads. I was at an accident here. Or there was a fatality here. You've been someplace long enough, you can begin to say, hey, I know what happened here and I know what happened. Moses walking down these trails is like, I know what happened here. This is when one of those goats broke its leg and I had to carry it. I know it over here. Yeah, there's this very dangerous cliff. I may or may not have lost one of my father-in-law's animals over here too as well. He was the expert. He knew. And God says to him, Moses, here's where you're leading the people. Moses would have known. He was from that area. No, God, that's not a good idea. But what does Moses do? Come on, people, we're going this way. Follow me. God says we're going out here. Moses was the expert. Now, Moses has this rod, which he's done some amazing things. In fact, pretty much all of the 10 plagues back in Egypt had something to do with this rod, did it not? And when they came to the body of water as the armies of Pharaoh were following after them, did that rod then not make where there was water, no water? He just the water divided and they walked across on dry ground. Moses, you take that rod, that very rod that turned water into no water, I want you to take that rod and I want you to use it to turn no water into water. Again, Moses is the expert. It's his rod. Oh, God, that's not how this works. This is not what Moses did. It's not recorded for us. This is what we would do if we were Moses. Wait a minute, God, I know what this rod does. This rod has the means to be handed out over the water, and suddenly it just divides. And what used to be a lot of water is now no water. You want me to now use that same rod that is, in his mind, in my mind. This rod is an amazing rod. You come to water, you just hold it out, and whoo, dry ground. This is amazing. This is a dry ground rod. But you want me to use this dry ground rod to hit on a dry rock and water come out? That's not. This is how we say it. That's not what you did last time, God. That's not how you work, God. I've seen you do this before, but you did it this way last time. You don't do it that way, God. There are obedience at times. It doesn't seem to have left Moses confused. But when we stand in the same shoes as Moses, it many times leaves us confused because we become the experts. This is how it works. My family will tell you, if we're watching TV and the insurance commercials come on, I sometimes get a little riled up. Not that I'm going to claim that I'm the expert on insurance, but, I forget, who was it, Flo. She advertises that if you bundle, you can save money. And I yell out, what do I say? Every insurance company does that. It doesn't matter. State Farm does that. You put your house and your home together. Your house and your home. Yeah, you put the house and the home together. That works. Put your house and your car together. You're going to save money. All the companies, you put them together, you save, but there's discounts. Why do they think that they have the edge of the market? Because if you bundle, you save money. We've got this little scanner thing that saves you money if you bundle. So does every other company. And so in my expert opinion, I'm yelling back at it doesn't matter. See, that Flo doesn't care what I think. I know Mary knows all about the intricacies of circuit board type things that she does. I have no clue. She's the expert. Joe does cabinets and bathrooms and kitchens and the whole works. He's the expert in that. Each one of us, we are the experts of things. Pastor, I know very little. I marvel at that. If I have a question on that, I know who to go to. The expert over there. We all are experts. We have a question. In fact, there was a dog fight in our backyard a couple weeks ago. And I called Becca out. Hey, check the dog out. Why? She's more of an expert about dogs than I am. See, you always tend towards those who are called the experts. Now, if I would say to Joe, hey, Joe, next time you got a house that wants a whole new kitchen, here's what you need to do. You need to go over to the cabinet there, the very first cabinet on your right. Doesn't matter what house it is, the first cabinet on your right. Open up the door and then slam it. Boom, new cabinetry. He's going to say, man, you are nuts. That's not how that works, Art. You got to do some measuring. You got to have one of the sales guys come out here. They figure out what they want. You got to figure out what kind of doors they want, what kind of cabinets they want, what kind of countertops they want. And then it's all got to get ordered. This doesn't just appear. You got to get ordered. And then the Amish in there in Arthur, Illinois, they build these cabinets. And then someone's got to go down to Arthur and pick them up and bring them back. And then someone's got to go install those things. And usually the customer's not going to be happy about something. And so we're going to have to get something changed or something tweaked or something added on. And this takes work. This takes time. There's a process here. You don't just open up the cabinet and slam it and then that fixes it. That's not how this works. I can't tell Mary, hey, next time you got a problem with one of those little circuit board things, whatever you call those things, just nod and wink at it. It'll fix it. She's going to say, you're as weird as I thought you were. That's not how that works. Michelle, next time you have a problem with the kids, just clap. Just say, you got a problem? All better. No, that's not how this works. Why? Because I'm the expert. Christy, I'm the expert. I'm the expert here. And so here's how this works. What is Moses saying? I'm the expert. No, this is not what Moses is saying. This is what we say if we were in Moses' shoes. I'm the expert. We don't go to this place that we're going to name Rephidim because there's no water in that area. I know that. I know there's water that way, and there's water that way, and there's water that way. But you want us to go this way? No water. No can do. Not going to work. I'm the expert. I've been here. I've walked these trails. Not going to work. Oh, so now we're here. Now they're thirsty. Lord, what are you going to do about them? They're going to kill me because you had us. Again, this is not what Moses is literally saying. This is what I'm literally saying. They're going to kill me, God, because you told me to bring them here. I knew there was no water. So how are you going to fix this? I was the expert. You didn't consult me. Now we're here. They're thirsty. Now what? Oh, now the solution. I thought throwing a tree in the water to make bitter water sweet was ridiculous. Now you want me to make the water disappear rod and make water appear now with that same rod? That's not how this works. That rod is for the opposite. It doesn't work this way. Know how often we do that with our God, and ultimately our obedience many times will leave us confused because we want to be the expert. Why are you chiding with me? My interjection. I already knew there was no water here. You could have asked me. I knew. So this isn't my problem. It's not what Moses is saying. And that's what we say. Our obedience may leave us thirsty, but our obedience as well may leave us confused because God doesn't always do it our way. God's ways aren't our ways, and his thoughts are not our thoughts. But yet, when we have the expert mentality, we expect God to meet our scenario the way we, in our expert opinion, thinks it needs to be met. Doesn't work that way. Moses uses the rod. He takes witnesses. Come here, guys, watch this. I have no idea what's going to happen here. Beats the rock, and out what comes out? Water. Again, in expert opinion, do you think Moses was a guy who spent 40 years wandering with animals? You think he didn't know every trick of the trade to figure out how to get water out of nothing? It's said that in that time frame and even beyond, even still today, that there are those that know how to do and find water just right underneath the surface. It looks dry, you can dig a little bit, and then there's water. There were those that knew exactly what kind of plants they could get water from. And they also knew what kind of plants they could get water from, but that wasn't good water to be drinking. They knew all the tricks of the trade. 40 years this man has done this. 40 years in this very area, Moses has done this. Not once in those 40 years did Moses ever beat a stick against a rock and have water come out. Not once in his 40 years of expert living did he ever get water that way. And if it were us, How many of us would be saying to God, no, that's not how this works? We know the story too well. We know Moses does it. We know it worked. But how many of us, when God says, I want you to do this, we say, no, that's not. That's cute and all, God, but that's not how it works. That's not how I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that with witnesses. I might do that in secret. You want me to do it? I'll do it in private. I'm going to do this in secret so that nobody watches me fail. But you want me can you even imagine, just imagine this. They're taking the expert. God says, you the expert, Moses. You've been here. You've done this. You know how to get water where there hasn't been water. But you know that there's no water here. I want you to take some witnesses, and I want you to do this. And I want it to be a testimony to both you and them what I will do for you. Moses does it. I would dare say a lot of Christians today turn their back and walk away. Like our little dog, we put a little bottom slide down and say, nope, not today. This doesn't make sense. This isn't how it works. This is not how it's supposed to happen. Clapping doesn't fix the problems. Nodding and winking doesn't fix that problem. Slamming a cabinet door doesn't fix that problem. That's not how it works, God. That's not how this thing works. We know. All the while, God is trying to show us how He works if we just step aside from the expert role. Very quickly, lastly, because I'm already out of time. The remainder of these verses, in fact, let me read the first couple of verses here. Verse 8, I'm sorry. Then came Amalek and fought with Israel in Rephidim. Let me stop right there. Why again are they in Rephidim? Verse 1. According to the commandments of the Lord. Why are they in Rephidim, in a place with no water? According to the commandments of the Lord. That was God's will for them, to be right there, right then, right now. Even though there was no water, so that God could show them that He was going to provide for them and continue to provide for them. Right there, right then, right now. Then we come to verse 8. Still same place. Now they're at least not thirsty, but what are they doing? For battle. These guys aren't trained for battle. These guys, this isn't not their thing. They've been laborers. They've been builders. They're construction workers. For the entirety of their life, from early age until old age, these guys have been construction laborers as slaves. Now they're not ready for battle. Wait a minute, God, time out. This is not where we're supposed to be, God. This is not how it's supposed to happen, God. We aren't ready for this. God, this can't happen. Our obedience may leave us very vulnerable. Then came Amalek. You know who Amalek was? I don't know, like the founder of the Amalekites. I was already quizzing my family on this morning. I would ask them to tell you what they are, but I'd be afraid they forgot already. Remember back a few generations previous, we have Abraham. Abraham has Isaac. Isaac has, obviously, a number of kids, two of them being Jacob and Esau. Pretty close in time frame. Which one was the older one? Esau. Who got the birthright? Jacob. What did Esau think about that? Not so liking brother anymore. Little brother anymore. What does Jacob think about that? You know, he's running for his life too. You know what happened to Esau? His oldest son was called Amalek. It's the cousins. Family reunion. Here we are. We've left Egypt after however many hundreds of years. We are finally getting closer back to where we used to be. And who do they run into? Who's the first group of people they run into after they saw the Pharaoh's army being destroyed? Imagine going for weeks, for perhaps months at this point, and all they've seen is just themselves. There's nobody else in this area. There's no cities around here. It's just wilderness. It's the Sinai Peninsula with nothing. The first group of people that they see are cousins. Cousins that want to kill them. How fun is this? In the parallel passage there, Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 17 to 19, let me read how this actually goes down. It says, remember what Amalek did. Moses is reminding them what happened right now. So we're jumping ahead in time frame. We're going back to the future. I guess we'll say how we say it that way. Deuteronomy is Moses on the edge of the promised land, not able to go in with them, and he's reminding them of their history and says, don't forget these things that happened to you, so that when you get over there, you'll be reminding yourself of your God. Here's what happened to you right back here in Exodus chapter 17. Remember what Amalek did unto thee by the way when ye were first come forth out of Egypt, how he met thee by the way and smote the hindmost of thee, even all that were feeble behind thee, when thou wast faint and weary, and he feared not God. What is Moses reminding them of that we don't really have recorded for us here in Exodus chapter 17? When it says, then came Amalek and fought with Israel and Rephidim, we move immediately to Moses' response to that fighting. And so in between verses 8 and verse 9, here's how Amalek came up to them. Remember where they are? Sinai Peninsula? They're down here. They don't have any places to go except now north. They have obviously come from the north, and they're coming from behind them. And what are they doing? It's like a sneak attack. They're taking down the weary ones. The ones that aren't keeping up. The ones that are just plain exhausted. Maybe some of the older ones. Maybe some of the sick ones. Maybe some of the ones that have so many blisters on the bottom of their feet they can barely walk. He starts taking them out. Not the strong ones. He's focusing on the weak ones. That's not even a sneak attack. That's just an ornery, wicked attack. In fact, Moses says he did not fear God. He didn't do this right. Why were they there in Rephidim? According to the commandments of the Lord. What happened in Rephidim? They saw God bless in a mighty way as water came out of a rock in the middle of a place with no water. To God be the glory. But then they lost a number of their own because the wicked cousins caught up to them. They had nowhere to go. They had no forces. They had no means. They were literally sitting ducks as they heard the death of those behind them. God, why did you bring us here? This isn't supposed to happen here. What have we done wrong? Why did you leave us? Why did you forsake us? Why is this happening? Our obedience at times may leave us very vulnerable. And we may suddenly get the attack from behind. We have no idea what's going to happen, but we know what happens here. Verse 9, Moses said unto Joshua, the first time Joshua was mentioned, a very young Joshua, choose out men and go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in mine hand. So Joshua did as Moses had said to him, and fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. Again, we're in the mountainous ranges, so this is going to take place right where they are in at this Rephidim. Now it seems like Moses is going like to the next mountain peak, and he's going to watch from up above. And so here's Moses and his two compadres there. They've gone to the next mountain, and they're watching the battle. Moses is taking his rod, which has done all kinds of miracles up to this point, things that don't make any sense, but it's happened. He takes his rod, and he just holds it up. I can imagine, probably kind of like our flannel graph things. Sometimes I think the flannel graphs have it like this. He's holding the rod like this. I just imagine kind of like as they cross the river, he just outstretches his hand with the rod. As many of the plagues happened, he just outstretched his hand with the rod. And God did things as that hand was stretched out with the rod in his hand. Moses is standing there with that rod out. Could you imagine? Now, you know what happens. He gets tired, and he puts his arms down. What happens? Here's what I want to know. How long did it take them to figure out what happened there? We don't have that recorded for us, but you think that as Moses this is a battle that's taking place. And so this is taking some time here. And he begins to get tired, and he begins to put down his rod, and then you think after a while, they're like, wait a minute. Something changed. Wait. We're no longer, well, let's put your rod back out. Let's see what happens. And suddenly, wait a minute, it's changing again. I just wonder, maybe in my comical side of things, that, all right, Moses, put your hand back out. Oh, look, now put your hand back down. Oh, no, put it back out. Did that happen? Wait. Is this what's happening here? It has to do with where my hand is, where this rod is? Put it down, Moses, see what happens. Oh, it's turning back. Put it back up. Oh, we're getting the victory. Moses, keep that rod up. We'll help you. Keep that rod up. We will get the victory. And they did get the victory. Again, does it make any sense that holding a rod in the air is the means of victory in a battle in the next mountain? No, that doesn't make any sense. Moses isn't even near them. He's watching them from afar, But how he stood with this rod made all the difference of the battle over there. Sometimes God's commands for our life, God's leading in our life will lead us to a spot where we are feeling pretty vulnerable. For the first time in months, Moses is no longer leading the people. Imagine that. For the first time in months, Moses is no longer in the lead of the people. They're fighting a battle over here. He's up here. For the first time, he's not in front, leading and directing. He is watching from afar. But from afar, he's having an impact on that battle because of our God. And there are times that our vulnerability sometimes gets us enough to say, you know what, God, I don't think I can do this. I don't think I can do this anymore. I'm not feeling comfortable with this. How many areas of our life, the moment we begin to feel vulnerable, do we back off and say, I don't know that that's right for me? Going back to Deuteronomy, as Moses reminds them what happened in this very moment, and how he began to smote the hindmost of thee, even all that were feeble behind thee, when they was faint and weary, and he feared not God. Moses says this, therefore it shall be, when the Lord thy God hath given thee rest from all thine enemies round about in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance to possess it, that thou shalt blot out the remembrance Amalek from under heaven. Thou shalt not forget it. You know what happened here in chapter 17? Not really mentioned very well in chapter 17. They realized, perhaps for the very first time, what battle was. They realized as well the might of God. And God instilled within their hearts, don't forget this. You are going to wipe them out because of what they did to you right here, right now. Right where I told you to be, you now have a responsibility to wipe that out. Wipe them out. Continue on, verse 12. Moses' hands were heavy, and he took a stone, and he put it under him, and he sat thereon, and Aaron and Hur stayed up his hands, the one on the one side and the other on the other side, and his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua discomfited Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. And the Lord said unto Moses, write this for a memorial in a book, and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua. You think Moses did that? Deuteronomy. He wrote it in the book, and he rehearsed it in their ears. You have got to know this. You've got to remember. This very moment, you must remember. For I will utterly put out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and called the name of it Jehovah Nissi. For he said, because the Lord has sworn that the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. We could almost say it this way, and this battle is the Lord's. The very event that began in Rephidim, where God commanded them to be. How well do we obey our God? How well do we follow our God? I'll follow him until I get thirsty, until I have a need, until something's not working out, until it doesn't measure the way I think. I'll follow you until that point, but at that point, I got plan B set ready to go. I will follow you in obedience, Lord, until it just doesn't make sense to me anymore. I will go with you, but when you say to set the Rephidim with 1 million people and animals, and I know I'm the expert, I've been there before, there's no water over there, I'm not going to follow you there to that extent. Not going to do it. I will follow you until I am feeling, vulnerable. When I begin to feel like I'm under attack, when I begin to get those sneak attacks from behind me and I don't know what's going on, Lord, that I can't do this. That's not what I'm called to do. You know how many, and I'm not trying to say this out of pride by any means, but you know how many pastors have left the ministry because they got a sneak attack from behind? You know how many pastors have said, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. And I'm not trying to place judgment. I don't know what they face, and I don't know their reasoning, and I don't know the Lord's leading in their lives. But from my vantage point, I can say this. It seems like there's been a lot of pastors that just walk away from the ministry because of what happened here. They got the sneak attack from behind. They felt pretty vulnerable. They thought that they were doing what exactly God called them to do, and suddenly there's this going on. That's not for me. I'm done. I go sell cars. I go do something else. This isn't for me. You know how many church members sitting in pews say, I once did this for the Lord, I once was a Sunday school teacher, I once was this or that, I once served in this capacity, but I got that sneak attack. I got that where I had a need, and Lord, it didn't seem like you were meeting it the way I thought that you should have. And you know what, I just threw up my arms and said, I just can't do this anymore. It's not for me. You know, if we were the children of Israel heading to Rephidim, if we were Moses leading them to that area, we would have a very different outcome in Exodus chapter 17, perhaps. Because as our expert opinion, we would have said, not Rephidim, it's not where we're going to go, God. It's not for us. Not a good place to be. But so much happened in that community, in that area, by God's command, that they needed to learn, that they needed to see, they needed to know. And as God tells Moses, they needed to be reminded of. Right here, right then, right now, in one of the worst times of your life since leaving Egypt. Know that I did this for you, and don't forget it. You obeyed, there was blessing. There was blessing. Oh, you were thirsty, but there was blessing. Oh, yeah, you had a sneak attack. There was blessing. Oh, you had to trust me and do that which you didn't think was ever going to happen the way I told you it was going to happen, but you trusted me, and there was blessing because you did. But it was a road to get to that blessing. But it only came because they obeyed. How's our obedience today? Let's pray. Lord, we thank you again for your word. I thank you for the example of the children of Israel as they journey through the wilderness, as they head at this point still to Mount Sinai, as they're still on their journey to worship their God. But even on their journey to the mount, designated for worship to you, there still was a lot of tragedy, a lot of trials on that road. And I pray that you would remind us in our own life, in our own walk, as we do our best to strive to serve and follow and obey you, and things just don't seem to work out the way we thought. Probably each one of us has spent some time in Rephidim before, seemingly out of obedience to you, but things are not working out the way we thought they should have been. I pray that we'd have the faith, that we'd have the trust in you, to hold out, to stand strong, to be firm, and even fight back for you as we stand for truth, as we stand for you. And we thank you for the blessings that we will gain as we learn of you and what you did here and now. We thank you for it in Jesus' name. Amen.